Hi, and thank you for tuning in to the Daily Dose for Spiritual Growth. Happy Thursday. It is Thursday, and we're glad that you're with us today. Today, we are focusing on Genesis chapter 23. Now, the last couple weeks, especially the last couple days, have been working through the life of Abraham. But in this chapter, it actually begins with the death of Sarah, his wife. And those of us that have experienced loss, maybe you have, I know I have on several occurrences, it is such a difficult time. And so we can relate to what pain and grief and loss that Abraham was feeling. And yet, like many of us, he was in a position where he was in charge of making some arrangements, making arrangements for, say, a funeral or for a burial spot. And so in this chapter, it's talking about Abraham finding a burial spot for his wife, Sarah. Now, just to remind you, in case you're just joining us today, Abraham is in a foreign land. God, several chapters ago, promised him a land that he would take over, and yet it hasn't come to fruition yet. He's still a foreigner. And so as we go into the story, I want you to listen, though, to the native people of that land, how they view Abraham. I'm going to be reading verses 5 and 6 from chapter 23. It says, "The Hittites replied to Abraham, 'Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead.'" Now, Abraham had went to an assembly of some of the leaders of that day, leaders in that space, the owners of the land, and he had asked, "Would someone sell me a piece of land so I can bury my wife?" And as you hear here, the people say, "You can have the best. Hey, you are a prince among us." What do we see here? Well, something that stands out to me is the favor that Abraham is experiencing. Abraham is experiencing respect and honor and favor from the people here. Now, we don't know fully, but we know that Abraham was a follower of God, that he had a relationship with God, and that very likely the people had seen how he acted, how he treated people, how he respected one another. And we're seeing God's favor now rest on Abraham as he interacts with these people. And so the question that I have for you today is, have you experienced the favor of God in your life? I know my husband, Pastor Nabil, and I have talked about that often. The favor of God is something so undeserved. And we've looked at seasons of our life where we had favor with other people. We'd had favor in purchasing a home. We'd have favor in people being there and supplying us with emotional or physical needs that we needed when we needed them. And if we really looked at the practicality of it, we recognize that was of no result of our own. It was really God's favor shining down on us. A couple weeks ago, I was talking to some students, and we were talking about how God no longer punishes us by hurting us when we sin. That's not how God operates, especially New Testament. God loves us, and he's provided an opportunity for us to have a relationship with him through his son, Jesus. But when we don't obey him, versus a hard hand coming down in hardship and struggle caused by God, he'll allow things, but caused by God. Instead, what we really see is a moving away of the blessing and favor of God on our life. And on the flip side, when we do obey God, when we do honor God, we see that blessing and that favor hover over us. And I think that's what we're seeing attributed in Abraham's situation. So when you look at your own life and you think about the seasons that you've went through, have you noticed, can you pinpoint seasons where you've experienced the favor of God? And what did that look like? Maybe consider sharing that with a friend, maybe talking to your spouse, reflecting on the past and thinking about what that might be. I think another important thing to note in this passage is that Abraham had been promised this land, and yet he hadn't been given it by God yet. It would have been easy for Abraham to come in with an arrogant attitude or hey, I already own this, come in with demands, come in with pride. But instead, he comes humbly to the men and he says, hey, would you sell me? And we're not going to go into it, but as you read the chapter today, verses 7 through 9, talk about how Abraham didn't want a handout. He didn't say, okay, awesome, give me whatever you got. He wanted to pay a fair price. You see, we can trust God's timing, that even if you're not experiencing the breakthrough yet, we know that God's promises we talked about earlier this week are good and true, and we can stand on them. And even in the waiting, we can honor God with how we choose to live our life, how we choose to act in business, how we choose to treat others. And then we can sit back and enjoy the favor and blessing of God as we walk in obedience. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hope to see you again tomorrow for another Daily Dose for Spiritual Growth.